Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. For the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Friday, July 24th, 2026. We are only 13 days until the start of fall practices and 44 days from the Buckeye season opener against Ball State. Things are starting to get real. Thank you for joining me for my annual look at the 5 games that will define Ohio State's 2026 regular season. When I've done this previously, you really had to squint to see 5 games on Ohio State's schedule that would be truly season defining. In most seasons, there were really only 2, maybe 3 regular season opponents that posed any real threat to the Buckeyes. That won't be the case this season. As I've already mentioned several times on this pod, I believe this will be the most challenging regular season the Buckeyes will face since 1999, and it could be the first since 2016 that they will face 4 true top 10 opponents in the regular season. And by true top 10, I mean teams that finish in the final top 10 of the AP poll. I'm not talking about their preseason ranking or where they were ranked when the Buckeyes played them. I'm talking about after all the games are played. Now, this year, I made a significant investment in college football preview magazines to help guide us through this exercise. Athlon, Lindy's, and Phil Steele. Now, I've already mentioned some of the views and rankings of those magazines over the last few weeks. Today, Pick 6 previews will enter the chat. And with those 4 publications, I think we can get a pretty good handle on what Ohio State will be facing in the 5 opponents that will define their 2026 regular season. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, then you already know the teams I'm about to mention because I've touched on them several times already. They are, in order of how they appear on the schedule, Texas, Indiana, USC, Oregon, and Michigan. Now, before we jump in, I want to do a quick summary of how Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick 6 previews view the Buckeyes this season. All 4 magazines have the Buckeyes ranked in their preseason top 3. Lindy's has Ohio State number 1, Pick 6 Previews ranks them number 2, and Phil Steele and Lindy's rank them number 3. 4 Buckeye position groups, quarterback, receiver, offensive line, and defensive line, are ranked in the top 10 nationally by all 4 magazines. In 3 of those units, quarterback, receiver, and offensive line, are ranked in their top 4. The Buckeye secondary is a consensus top 10 unit, and the only publication that doesn't have the Ohio State secondary in its top 10 is Phil Steele, which has that unit ranked 16th. Now, that prediction will turn out to be a huge whiff, by the way. I've already talked about this on this pod. The Ohio State secondary is the strength of the defense, and it will prove to be as good as any in the country. Mark those words. Finally, all 4 magazines are aligned in their view that the Buckeye linebackers will be several notches below what they were a year ago, and that's understandable when you lose players like Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, who are both top 10 draft picks. The Ohio State linebackers did not make the top 10 of Athlon or Lindy's. Phil Steele has that unit ranked 16th, and Pick 6 Previews rates it 13th. Now, I do think the Ohio State linebackers can outperform those rankings this season because there are still some very good players in that unit, as I've already discussed in previous pods. 3 Buckeyes are consensus preseason All-Americans, according to Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick 6 Previews. Jeremiah Smith, Julian Sayin, and Austin Sareveld. Smith and Sayin are unanimous selections. And in what I'm calling the best of the rest, Earl Little received 2 preseason All-American selections. Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Devin Sanchez, and long snapper Dalton Riggs all received 1. The first season-defining game on this absolutely brutal schedule for the Buckeyes is, of course, Texas on September 12th. The Buckeyes will travel to Austin for the first time in 20 years to square off with the Longhorns in Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium. This game will be a 7:30 p.m. Eastern kick, hallelujah, on ABC. The early line, according to FanDuel, is Texas minus 1.5. The Buckeyes lead the all-time series between these programs 3-2, and they've won the last 2 matchups, including a 14-7 Ohio State win in the Horseshoe last season. Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele all have Texas ranked in their top 5. Pick 6 Previews have the Longhorns rated a little lower than that at number 7, which I think is interesting. Texas is coming off a disappointing 2025 season in which they finished 10-3 and missed the college football playoff after beginning the season number 1 in the first AP poll. According to Phil Steele, head coach Steve Sarkisian returned 16 starters, 5 of which are incoming transfers that started for their previous teams last season. Athlon Lindy's Phil Steele and Pick Six previews have 4 Texas position groups: quarterback, receiver, defensive line, and linebacker ranked in the top 10 nationally. And 3 of the 4 magazines rank the Texas running back room in the top 10. Now, the Texas offensive line is where these 4 publications are divided. Athlon and Lindy's have the Longhorn offensive line rated in the top 5, but Phil Steele and Pick Six previews have it rated in the teens and seem to view that position as a relative weakness despite having arguably the best left tackle in the game, Trevor Goosby. Steele has the Longhorn offensive line rated number 18, and Pick Six previews has it rated number 13. That's something to pay attention to as we think about that Ohio State defensive front against that Longhorn offensive line on September 12th. Now, all 4 magazines are aligned on the Texas secondary as the weakest area of the roster. The Longhorn secondary did not make the top 10 of any of these 4 magazines, and Phil Steele has that unit rated all the way down at number 19. Again, this is another matchup we should pay attention to as we think about those Ohio State receivers with Jeremiah Smith going up against those Longhorn DBs. There's an advantage there clearly for the Buckeyes. According to Athlon Lindy's Phil Steele and Pick Six previews, 4 Longhorns are consensus preseason All-Americans: left tackle Trevor Goosby, wide receiver Cam Coleman, the Auburn transfer, defensive end Colin Simmons, and linebacker Rasheem Biles, the Pitt transfer. And of that group, Goosby, Coleman, and Simmons are unanimous selections. And again, what I'm calling the best of the rest: quarterback Arch Manning, wide receiver Ryan Wingo, safety Jelani McDonald, and punt returner Ryan Niblett were named preseason All-Americans by 2 of these magazines. So that's 8 Longhorns named preseason All-American by at least 2 of these magazines. That is a lot of good players. And in players like Simmons, Biles, and Goosby, we might be talking about the best players at their positions in the country. In 615 snaps for the Longhorns last season, Simmons finished with a team-high 12 sacks, 59 quarterback pressures, and a ridiculous PFF pass rush grade of 91.7. In 670 snaps at Pitt last season, Rasheem Biles, who, by the way, is a Columbus native, finished with a team-high 100 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 picks. I think Biles is the best linebacker in the country. Finally, left tackle Trevor Goosby was a beast for the Texas offensive line a year ago. In 847 snaps last season, Goosby finished with PFF grades in the 80s across the board. He's an excellent player for them. But of course, the face of this Texas team is still junior quarterback Arch Manning, who enters his 2nd season as the starter for the Longhorns. Manning's 2025 campaign wasn't quite the spectacle most of us anticipated. He was underwhelming in road losses to Ohio State, Florida, and Georgia, but he did help engineer big wins over number 3 Texas A&M and number 18 Michigan to close out the season. And against the Wolverines in the Citrus Bowl, Manning's full arsenal was on display. He accounted for 4 touchdowns in that game, throwing for 221 yards and running for another 155. But Manning's 61% completion percentage last season tied him with Noah Kim of Eastern Michigan for 81st nationally. That was 16 percentage points behind Julian Sayin, who led the country. And therein lies the challenge for Manning this season. He has to be a more efficient passer for Texas to get back to the CFP. I think any Texas fan would tell you that. Now, the addition of Cam Coleman and the return of Ryan Wingo at receiver should help bring that completion percentage for Manning up. In 2 seasons at Auburn, Coleman finished with just over 1,300 receiving yards on 93 receptions and 13 touchdown catches. And last season, Wingo was the Longhorns' leader in receptions with 54, receiving yards with 834, and receiving touchdowns with 7. Coleman and Wingo were both 5-star prospects in the 2024 class, according to 24/7 Sports. Coleman was the number 2 rated receiver behind Jeremiah Smith and the number 5 overall player, according to 24/7 Sports. Wingo was the number 7 rated receiver and number 32 overall player in that class. Look, I think Coleman and Wingo will probably be the best receiver duo the Buckeyes will face this season. The Longhorns will have a new face at running back. Their leading rusher of the last 2 seasons, Trey Wisner, is now at Florida State. NC State transfer Hollywood Smothers will tote the rock for the Longhorns this season. Smothers began his career at Oklahoma in 2023 before transferring to NC State. In 2 seasons with the Wolfpack, Smothers ran for just over 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns at 6 yards per carry. He also caught 56 passes for just over 450 yards and 3 touchdowns. On defense, the Longhorns will be very good up front once again. Athlon Lindy's Phil Steele and Pick Six previews, again, all rate the Longhorn defensive line and linebackers as top 10 units. And as I mentioned, edge Colin Simmons and linebacker Rasheem Biles might be the best players at their positions in the country. They will be a handful for the Ohio State offensive line, no doubt about it. But if we're to believe Athlon Lindy's Phil Steele and Pick Six previews, the Longhorns secondary is going to be a notch or two below its usual standard this season. They were the best secondary in the country back in 2024 with Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba. But the play of that unit dropped off in 2025. The Longhorns finished 97th in pass defense, allowing an average of 235 yards per game. Now, it'll be interesting to see if new Texas defensive coordinator Will Muschamp still has his fastball. Muschamp replaced Pete Kwiatkowski, who was fired by Steve Sarkisian during the offseason, and he'll be running a defense for the first time since 2015, when he was the defensive coordinator at Auburn. That was 11 years ago. Now, Steve Sarkisian is starting to venture into James Franklin territory against AP Top 5 opponents. He is 2-7 against the AP Top 5 in his 5 seasons at Texas. And he's one of the few head coaches in the Power 4 who doubles as an offensive play caller, which might explain the lack of success in matchup games. He just has too much on his plate. But he's working with what might be the most talented roster in the country this season, and he gets the Buckeyes at home in this game. I think Ohio State is at a talent disadvantage in this game, and they're on the road, but I like the way they match up with the Longhorns, especially the Buckeye receivers against that Longhorn secondary. And look, I think Texas has a lot of unanswered questions here. Are the Longhorns capable of reaching their championship ceiling with Sarkisian in the dual role of head coach and offensive play caller? Can Arch Manning improve on that dreadful 61% completion percentage? What does Will Muschamp have left in the tank? I think Ohio State is going to have the coaching edge in this game with Ryan Day, Matt Patricia, and Arthur Smith. My concernometer, though, is naturally at a 10 for this one. I think this game could go either way. Ohio State and Texas both have brutal schedules this season. According to Phil Steele, Texas has the toughest schedule in the country. Ohio State isn't far behind with the 6th toughest schedule in the country. The loser of this game is going to have an uphill climb to the CFP. On October 17th, the Buckeyes travel to Bloomington for the first time since 2023 to face the defending national champion Indiana Hoosiers. The kick time for this game is still TBD. The early line, according to FanDuel, is Ohio State minus 1.5. Ohio State leads the all-time series 81-13 with 5 ties. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with Big Ten football, the Hoosiers were a perennial doormat for generations before head coach Curt Cignetti arrived in Bloomington. In just 2 seasons, though, Cignetti has transformed the Hoosiers into a national powerhouse. And the Hoosiers have 2 double-digit win seasons since 1899. Both of them belong to Cignetti. He's 25-2 with 2 CFP appearances, a Big Ten title, and a national championship since his arrival in 2024. What a transformation Cignetti has made of that program. Athlon Lindy's and Phil Steele all have Indiana at number 5 in their preseason rankings. Pick Six previews, not quite as sold on the Hoosiers. They have them at number 9, which personally I think is too low. Curt Cignetti is facing a pretty big rebuild this season after losing a Heisman winner at quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, 2 1,000-yard backs in Roman Hemby and Kalon Black, his 2 leading receivers, Omar Cooper Jr. and Elijah Surratt, his second leading tackler in linebacker Aiden Fisher, his top cornerback in D'Angelo Pons, and an excellent safety in Lewis Moore, who led the Hoosiers in interceptions last season. At the same time, Cignetti has a fair amount of talent returning, mostly on defense, including his top 3 in quarterback sacks, linebackers Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones, and defensive tackle Tyreek Tucker. Hardy also led the Hoosiers in tackles with 103. Safety Amari Farrell and cornerback Jamari Sharp will also return. Farrell and Sharp led the Hoosiers in snaps last season. They never came off the field, and their PFF coverage grades were outstanding, well over 80 for both. Cignetti is also getting 4 of 5 starters back from an offensive line that was a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award last season. That includes All-American left tackle Carter Smith, who's probably the best left tackle in the country. And as we know, Cignetti has been masterful at building a roster from the transfer portal, and it looks like he's done it again. According to On3, Indiana had the number 1 transfer class this offseason, headlined by TCU quarterback Josh Hoover and Michigan State receiver Nick Marsh. According to Athlon Lindy's Phil Steele and Pick Six previews, 3 Indiana position groups, offensive line, defensive line, and the secondary, rank in the top 10 nationally. and 3 of the 4 have the Indiana linebackers ranked in the top 3 nationally. The lone holdout is Phil Steele, who has that group ranked number 11. I've talked about this before. 11 is entirely too low when we're talking about a room that has Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones. There are 3 areas where all 4 magazines expect Indiana to take a step back, though. The first is running back. The Hoosier running backs did not make the top 10 of Lindy's or Athlon or the top 15 of Pick 6 previews, and Phil Steele has the IU running back room all the way down at number 44. All 4 magazines are also expecting a drop-off at quarterback, though not quite as dramatic as running back. Only one, Athlon, has the IU quarterbacks in the top 10 at number 8, and that's something to pay attention to as we think about this matchup with the Buckeyes and what was the difference between Ohio State and Indiana in last year's Big Ten title game. As we remember, the difference was a small handful of big-time plays Fernando Mendoza made in high-leverage moments, including a 33-yard pass play on 3rd down to Charlie Becker with just over 2 minutes to play that effectively ended the game. Now, does Josh Hoover possess that level of playmaking in high-leverage moments? That's a big question for these 4 magazines, apparently. Finally, Athlon, Lindy's, and Phil Steele and Pick 6 previews see a slight drop-off coming for the Hoosiers at receiver. Athlon and Lindy still have the IU receivers in the top 10, but Steele has them at number 11, and Pick 6 Previews has them at number 15. I tend to think Charlie Becker and Michigan State transfer Nick Marsh will outperform those rankings. I think the Hoosiers are going to be pretty damn good at this position. I would not be too worried about receiver if I were an Indiana fan. According to Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick 6 previews, the Hoosiers have 6 consensus preseason All-Americans: left tackle Carter Smith, linebacker Isaiah Jones, defensive tackle Tyreek Tucker, linebacker Elijah Hardy, safety Amari Farrell, and wide receiver Charlie Becker. So that's twice as many consensus preseason All-Americans as Ohio State. And of that group, Smith and Jones are unanimous preseason All-Americans. And in the best of the rest category, receiver Nick Marsh and defensive tackle Mario Landino were each named preseason All-American by one of these publications. I think Indiana will have the best defense the Buckeyes will see all season, or certainly during the regular season. The Hoosiers remind me a little of last year's Ohio State defense, actually, which was, a lead up the middle with an All-American defensive tackle, 2 All-American linebackers, and an All-American safety. Tyreek Tucker, Isaiah Jones, Elijah Hardy, and Amari Farrell might be the 2026 equivalent of Cade McDonald, Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese, and Caleb Downs. In any case, they'll be very good. They might not be that good, but they'll be very, very good at those positions. And while IU likely won't be quite as dynamic on offense as last season, there's still plenty for Matt Patricia to worry about in this game. Josh Hoover isn't Fernando Mendoza, I don't think, but he's still a veteran quarterback heading into his 5th season of college football. He's approaching 10,000 career passing yards with over 70 career touchdown passes, and he'll be operating behind a top 3 offensive line with 2 very dangerous targets in Charlie Becker and Nick Marsh. And this is probably the only game on the Ohio State schedule where the opponent owns the coaching edge. Curt Cignetti is widely regarded as the best coach in the game, and his offensive and defensive coordinators, Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes, have been with Cignetti since 2019 at James Madison. Look, I don't see any major questions for this Indiana team. The Hoosiers have the best coaching staff in the game. They'll be elite on both lines of scrimmage. They have preseason All-Americans at every level of the defense, and they have a veteran trigger man approaching 10,000 career passing yards operating the offense. This is another 10 on the concernometer for me, and the more I dig into it, I'm not sure how the odds makers have the Buckeyes as a 1.5-point road favorite in this matchup. Now, that's not to say Ohio State doesn't have the goods to win this game. I think they can win it. I'm just not sure how they're the favorite right now. And a game like this is why you bring a coordinator of Arthur Smith's bona fides to Columbus. If the Buckeyes are faced with another 3rd and short in the IU red zone late in the 4th quarter of this game, I expect Arthur Smith to dial up a better play than a pass to his 4th-string tight end while Jeremiah Smith watches from the sideline. I think this game is going to be a rock fight. I'm expecting the score to be very similar to last year's Big Ten title game. I'd be surprised if either team eclipses 20 points. The Buckeyes will have to be at their very best to get out of Bloomington with a win in this game. 2 weeks later, on October 31st, Halloween, the Buckeyes will travel to Los Angeles to square off with the USC Trojans in the Coliseum for the first time since 2008. The kick time for this game is still TBD. The early line, according to DraftKings, is Ohio State minus 7.5. This will be the 25th meeting between these programs. USC leads the all-time series 13-10 with 1 tie. Now, the Buckeyes don't travel to the Coliseum that often, but when they do, they get the holy living shit beat out of them. USC has won the last 4 games played between these schools in the Coliseum by a combined score of 126-9. Ouch. The last time the Buckeyes beat the Trojans in that stadium, the face mask hadn't been invented. That was 1948. Lincoln Riley's squad is coming off a solid 9-4 season, which included home wins over Michigan and Iowa and road losses to Illinois, Notre Dame, and Oregon. The Trojans were undefeated at home last season, and they're very tough to beat at the Coliseum. According to Phil Steele, the Trojans have 17 returning starters, 4 of which are incoming transfers that started for their former teams last season. Between Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six previews, only one, Lindy's, has the Trojans ranked preseason top 10. The Trojans land at number 11 for Phil Steele and Pick Six previews, and Athlon has the Trojans rated number 14. Only one USC position group quarterback is rated top 10 by Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six previews. The USC offensive line, which returns all 5 starters, is rated top 10 by 3 of the 4. These magazines are split on their views of the USC running backs. Phil Steele and Pick Six previews rate the Trojan running backs in their top 10. Lindy's and Athlon do not. All 4 are united in their view that the USC receivers will be a notch or 2 below their usual standard. That unit did not make the top 10 of any of the 4 magazines, and Phil Steele has that unit rated all the way down at number 19. On defense, the Trojan defensive line lands in the 9 to 12 range nationally, according to these magazines. With one exception, the USC linebackers and secondary are not viewed as top 10 units by any of these magazines. The exception, of course, is Lindy's, which had the SE linebackers rated number 4. Seems to be a lot of questions about the back 7 of the Trojan defense. Phil Steele has both units rated in the 30s. That's something to pay attention to as we think about the Ohio State offense matching up with those USC linebackers and secondary. Not a single Trojan was named preseason All-American by these 4 publications, which I think is interesting because there are some good football players wearing that USC uniform, starting with quarterback Jaden Mayaba, who threw for just over 3,700 yards and 24 touchdown passes last season. Mayaba also ran for another 6 touchdowns. I think the Trojans are going to be very good at running back with King Miller and Wayman Jordan. Both averaged just over 6 yards per carry a year ago. Jordan's 2025 season was cut short after only 5 games due to an ankle injury. He had off-season surgery on that ankle, but he's considered fully healthy now and ready to return for the Trojans. I think the Trojans are going to have a very good run game this season. On defense, Iowa State cornerback Jontez Williams is a player to watch. In 3 seasons for the Cyclones, Williams had 5 interceptions and 10 PBUs. He finished last season with an excellent overall PFF grade of 83.6 and a coverage grade of 84.6. Leading tackler linebacker Desmond Stevens II is another player to watch for this USC defense. Stevens finished 2025 with 89 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 1 forced fumble. He's a sure tackler and excellent in coverage. Stevens finished last season with a PFF tackling grade of 76.6 and a coverage grade of 82. USC's leader in sacks, defensive end Cameron Crawford, will also return at 6'5", 265 pounds from Mobile, Alabama. Crawford was a top 100 player in the 2024 class, according to 24/7 Sports. He finished 2025 with 5.5 sacks, 21 pressures, and a solid PFF tackling grade of 76. But the rest of his PFF grades were in the 60s, so just so-so. Sophomore defensive end Jakeem Stewart, who was a top 100 player in the 2025 class, is another player to watch for the Trojans. In a reserve role last season, Stewart finished with 18 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 8 quarterback pressures. I mean, look, if we're being honest, not a lot of sizzle with this group of returning defensive players. I think that's also because USC is very young. I read on Twitter yesterday, I'm not sure how true this is, that USC has the youngest roster in the Big Ten. But help would seem to be on the way in the form of their number 1 ranked 2026 recruiting class, which has a couple of immediate impact defensive players, and edge Luke Wafel, a player Ohio State recruited heavily, and defensive tackle Jamian Winfield. Wafel was the number 7 overall player in the 2026 recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports, and Winfield was the number 30 overall player in the class. No doubt Wafel and Winfield will have a role for this defense, and they both might even start. During the offseason, Lincoln Riley replaced defensive coordinator D'Anton Lynn with Gary Patterson. Patterson spent 25 seasons at TCU, 22 of them as head coach, and he built some nasty defenses for the Horned Frogs during his time there. But Patterson hasn't coached since 2021, and he hadn't been a defensive coordinator since 2000. Like Will Muschamp at Texas, I wonder if Patterson still has his fastball. It's been a minute. Now, I think there's good reason to trust Lincoln Riley's track record at building explosive offenses, and I think that unit should be very good again this season for USC. Jaden Mayava is among the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks in the country. I don't think there's any doubt about that. All 5 starters on the offensive line will be back. Riley has a very good pair of running backs in King Miller and Wayman Jordan. SC should be among the better rushing offenses in the Big Ten this season. Now, receiver is a bit of a question, as we discussed, with Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane off to the NFL. But sophomore Tunuk Hines returns from a very productive freshman season. Hines caught 34 balls for 561 yards at 16.5 yards per reception and 2 touchdown catches. What strikes me about this USC team is Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six previews all project the Trojans as an at-large playoff team. But after Mayava, there just aren't a lot of household names, particularly on defense. And I think that has to do with USC's youth. And maybe there are 6 to 8 players on that roster that are about to announce their stardom to the world, and we just don't know who they are yet. That's certainly not an unrealistic possibility at a place like USC. But for now, we don't really know who their top line players are going to be in 2026. The other question I have is similar to Steve Sarkisian. Is the dual role of head coach and offensive play caller really working for Lincoln Riley? I mean, can you win at the highest level as a head coach when your nose is buried in a play sheet on game day? That's a big question. And also, can Riley finally get his defense right? That's a question that's dogged him dating back to his time at Oklahoma. Now, he's made a big bet on a coach in Gary Patterson, who's been out of the game for a while, to run his defense. So we'll see how that plays out. The Buckeyes will be coming off a bye into this game, so they'll have an extra week to prepare. This game will be played on Halloween. And while the Coliseum has been a house of horrors for the Buckeyes dating back to the late 40s, I'm not sure this USC team can prolong the nightmare for Ohio State in that stadium. I'm setting my concernometer at a 7 for this game. The Buckeyes are going to have to play well to win it. I think it's going to be close, but I'm pretty confident they can get out of the Coliseum with their first win in that stadium since the Truman administration. 1 week later, on November 7th, the Buckeyes return home to face Dan Lanning, Dante Moore, and the loaded Oregon Ducks. The kick time for this game is still TBD. The early line, according to DraftKings, is Ohio State -6, which seems like an awfully large spread to me. I wouldn't be surprised if that line comes down 4 or 5 points as we get closer to the date. This will be the 13th meeting between these programs. Ohio State leads the all-time series 10-2, and that includes, of course, a 41-21 beatdown of the 1-seeded Ducks in the CFP back in 2024. But the last time these schools played in Columbus, 2021, Oregon won it 35-28. The Ducks are coming off a very successful 13-2 season that also included another embarrassing postseason collapse, this time in the CFP semifinals to Indiana. The Ducks were bludgeoned by the Hoosiers 56-22 in that game. According to Phil Steele, the Ducks returned 15 starters, 6 on offense, 9 on defense, and only 1 of those is an incoming transfer. Oregon has 4 units, quarterback, receiver, defensive line, and the secondary ranked in the top 5 nationally by Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six previews. And 2 others, running back and offensive line, are ranked in the top 10 nationally by Athlon, Phil Steele, and Pick Six previews. Linebacker is the only area that isn't considered elite by all 4 magazines. Athlon and Lindy's have the Oregon linebackers rated number 5 nationally, but Phil Steele has that unit rated 26th, and Pick Six previews has it rated number 14. A staggering 11 Oregon Ducks were named preseason All-American by at least one of Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six previews. Quarterback Dante Moore, center Iapani Laloulu, defensive tackle Amari Washington, safety Coy Parrish, tight end Jamari Johnson, defensive end Mateo Uyunglele, and cornerback Brandon Finney are all consensus preseason All-Americans. And of that group, Moore, Laloulu, Washington, and Parrish are unanimous selections. Linebacker Tatum Tuioti, defensive tackle Bear Alexander, running back Jordan Davison, and wide receiver Evan Stewart also received some preseason All-American love from these magazines. So a lot of returning experience, production, and star power for Dan Lanning's team, no doubt about it. However, it is worth noting that Lanning is replacing both of his coordinators after Will Stein and Tosh Lupoi left for head coaching jobs. Stein is now the head coach at Kentucky, and Lupoi took the head coaching job at Cal. Lanning promoted 38-year-old Drew Mayringer from tight ends coach to replace Stein as the OC, and 40-year-old Chris Hampton from safeties coach to replace Lupoi at DC. Hampton has previous experience as a DC. He held that post for 2 seasons at Tulane from 2021 to 2022. But this will be the first time in his career that Mayringer will be a full-time coordinator, and he has enormous shoes to fill in replacing Will Stein. Stein was the OC and quarterbacks coach from 2023 to 2025. 2 times during that stretch, Oregon finished in the top 10 nationally in scoring offense. The only season that didn't happen, 2024, Oregon finished 17th in scoring offense, so still pretty damn good. And the quarterback play at Oregon under Stein during that stretch was otherworldly. All of his starting quarterbacks, Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, and Dante Moore, finished with completion percentages of well over 70%. And Nix set the all-time single-season record for completion percentage in 2023, completing a staggering 77.4% of his passes. Nix also threw 45 touchdown passes that season. Nix and Dylan Gabriel were also Heisman finalists under Stein. Maybe Mayringer works out just fine for Oregon, but as an Ohio State fan, I am extremely leery of an internal promotion to replace a star coordinator. We've seen that very thing blow up in Ryan Day's face several times, including Brian Hartline last season and Kerry Combs as a defensive coordinator back in 2020. And the transitions at OC and DC probably explain why Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six Previews are split on their overall preseason rankings for the Ducks. Lindy's and Pick Six Previews, they're buying into the talent. They have the Ducks ranked number 1 in their rankings. They both have them winning the national championship. But Athlon and Phil Steele have Oregon all the way down at number 6 in their rankings, which I think says something when you consider all that talent on that roster. Personally, I think the Buckeyes are going to have their hands full on November 7th with this Oregon team. Now, they'll be at home, but I don't think there's any doubt Oregon holds a talent edge in this matchup. And I think where this game falls on the schedule for the Buckeyes, being the last of 3 games in 4 weeks against playoff contenders, works in Oregon's favor as well. Now, Dan Lanning has had his troubles in the postseason, but not in the regular season. He's 34-2 in the regular season since 2023. I'm setting my concernometer at a 10 for this one. This is another game where Arthur Smith and Matt Patricia will earn those paychecks. They will have to be difference makers for the Buckeyes in this game. And the home crowd, Buckeye Nation, will have to be a factor as well. Finally, on November 28th, it's Michigan in the Horseshoe, where the Buckeyes have not beaten the Wolverines since 2018. It feels very weird to say that. As always, this game will be a noon Eastern kick on Fox. The early line is Ohio State minus 11.5, according to FanDuel, and minus 14, according to DraftKings. That is a huge spread. This will be the 121st meeting between these programs. Michigan leads the all-time series 62-52 with 6 ties. The Wolverines are coming off a mildly disappointing 9-4 season that included losses to Oklahoma, USC, Ohio State, and to Texas in the Citrus Bowl. It's been a very long off season for the Michigan football program, which has been embroiled in scandal on a number of different fronts for several years now, actually. As we know, head coach Sharon Moore was fired last December for having an inappropriate relationship with a female staffer. Enter Kyle Whittingham, the longtime Utah head coach. Whittingham and Utah parted ways over a contract dispute involving his salary and control of the program last season, right before Utah's bowl game. Whittingham had 177 wins in his 21 seasons at Utah. That includes an 11-6 record in bowl games, and he led the Utes to back-to-back Pac-12 championships in 2021 and 2022. He takes over a Michigan program that, has lost its way since Jim Harbaugh left after the 2023 season. I mean, after what was the winningest 3-year stretch in Michigan football history from 2021 to 2023, the Wolverines are 17-9 over the last 2 seasons. Whittingham will inherit a Michigan roster with 3 position groups, running backs, defensive line, and the secondary, that are consensus top 10 units according to Athlon, Lindy's, Phil Steele, and Pick Six Previews. The Michigan offensive line is considered a top 15 unit by all 4 magazines. Now, the challenged areas for Whittingham, according to these four magazines, are quarterback, wide receiver, and linebacker. Phil Steele has Bryce Underwood and the Michigan quarterbacks rated all the way down at number 29, and he has their receivers and linebackers rated in the 30s. Now, the only Michigan player to be named preseason All-America by all four magazines is defensive end John Henry Daly, who followed Kyle Whittingham to Michigan from Utah. Daly had 11.5 sacks for the Utes last season, but he tore his Achilles in late November against Kansas State. We'll see how effective he can be for the Wolverines coming off of that injury. That's a big question for the Michigan defense. The only other Michigan players to earn preseason All-American honors were running back Jordan Marshall and defensive back Jair Hill, both by Pick 6 previews. According to Phil Steele, Michigan has the second toughest schedule in the country behind Texas this season. The Wolverines have home dates with Oklahoma, Iowa, Penn State, and Indiana, and they have to travel to Oregon and Ohio State. That is a brutal schedule. And I think that schedule and a roster that's solid but not great are likely the reason all four magazines have the Wolverines ranked in the 13 to 16 range, and all four believe Michigan will miss the playoff this season. Whether Michigan can outperform those rankings, I think really comes down to one thing, and that's the development of quarterback Bryce Underwood. Underwood has all the physical tools in the world to be a great player. He was just very raw last season. I actually heard Bill Landis say that he did not have a position coach at Michigan last year under Sherrone Moore, which is crazy. I mean, how do you let that happen at a place like Michigan with a player as talented as Underwood? Well, I'll never understand. If offensive coordinator Jason Beck and quarterbacks coach Coy Detmer can get Underwood right, I think Michigan could be a real problem for the Buckeyes on November 28th, because I think they're going to be able to run the ball with Jordan Marshall and incoming five-star freshman Savion Hyder. Marshall and Hyder could be, I think, one of the best running back tandems in the country this season. And I don't think Michigan is totally devoid of talent at receiver. I mean, Andrew Marsh is a pretty good player, in my opinion. Another big key to Michigan's success, I think, is safety Rod Moore, who missed most of the last two seasons recovering from a torn ACL. Prior to his injury, Moore was a 2-year starter for the Wolverines. Ohio State fans will painfully remember Moore's game-sealing interception against the Buckeyes in 2023. When healthy, Moore is one of the better safeties in the country, but he's only played 85 snaps since 2023. So that's a big question for Michigan as well. After 2 seasons of the Sherrone Moore clown show, I think Michigan will be a better football team this year just by virtue of having some adults in the room to run this program. And it seems like Whittingham has enough pieces there to get Michigan back to doing what it does best, which is run the football and play defense at a high level. Now, assuming health, I think this could be a pretty good Michigan team by the time the Buckeyes see them on November 28th. But the Buckeyes have the talent edge. I think they have the edge at quarterback with Julian Saint. I think they're going to have the best player in this game with Jeremiah Smith. And, all due respect to Kyle Whittingham, I think Ohio State's going to have the coaching edge in this game as well. Plus, they'll be playing at home. I'm going to set my concernometer at a solid 7 for this game, which, mind you, is normally at a 10 for Michigan. I feel pretty good about Ryan Day getting his second straight win over Michigan in this game, and it actually would be Ryan Day's first at home against Michigan in his career as head coach. But the Buckeyes are going to have to earn it. Kyle Whittingham's team is not going to lay down for the Buckeyes in this game. I'm still thinking through my preseason predictions for the Buckeyes, but with 51 new players on the roster, it's hard to look at these 5 opponents and not see at least one loss, because there are 2 games, Texas and Oregon, where I think the Buckeyes are at a talent disadvantage, and I see a third in Indiana that has the personnel to more or less match Ohio State's. They probably have the better coaching staff, and that game is on the road. And against USC in a stadium where the Buckeyes haven't won since the Truman administration, and a rivalry game against Michigan, honestly, anything can happen. And of course, I haven't even mentioned road games at Iowa and at Nebraska that have environments that are really, really tough to win as the visiting team. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Things are about to get real for the Buckeyes. Fall practices are less than 2 weeks away. Look for another pod from me probably sometime after fall practices start. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.